My husband found a beggar with her baby in the pouring rain and brought them home to live in our multi-million-dollar villa. He told our friends, our family, that it was a selfless act of charity, the ultimate act of compassion. But I was there. I saw the look in his eyes that night, and it wasn't pity. It was pure, animalistic fear. In that moment, I knew this wasn't about saving a stranger. This was about silencing a ghost. This was the desperate act of a man trying to lock away my husband's secret. He thought he was bringing home a problem he could control, but he had actually brought home the living proof of a crime I never knew he'd committed. This wasn't a simple story of infidelity. This was the story of uncovering my husband's secret life, a life built on the bones of a dead man. If you believe the most dangerous lies are the ones hidden in plain sight, subscribe and click that notification bell right now. You are about to watch how one single rainy night unraveled a perfect life and exposed a perfect murder. The storm that night was biblical, the kind that makes you grateful for thick glass walls and a solid roof. Rain hammered against our Palo Alto villa, but inside, it was my sanctuary. The fireplace crackled, casting a warm, orange glow across the Italian marble floors. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air, Julian's favorite. I remember swirling the wine in my glass, watching the storm, and feeling a deep, profound sense of peace. We had it all. Julian was the golden boy of Silicon Valley, the brilliant mind behind a billion-dollar software empire, and I was his wife, Clara, the woman who had happily traded her own promising architecture career to build our home, our life. I never regretted it. Not for a second. I loved the life we'd created. It was solid. It was real. I thought I knew everything about the man I'd married, but I was about to find out just how little I knew about my husband's secret past. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway pulled me from my thoughts. Julian. Finally. I smiled, turning to plate the dinner, but when the headlights swept across the living room, I saw two silhouettes in his Tesla, not one. My smile faltered. He never brought work people home unannounced. The front door opened, letting in a gust of wind and rain, and there he was, my handsome, confident husband, looking rattled, and behind him, dripping onto the pristine floor, was a woman. She was thin, wearing clothes that were soaked through and utterly inadequate for the weather. In her arms, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, was a baby, no older than a year. My first instinct was a jolt of sympathy. My second, a cold knot of dread in my stomach. Clara. Honey, Julian began, his voice strained. He wouldn't look me in the eye. His gaze kept darting between me and the woman. This is, Maya and Leo. I found them. Their car broke down just off the highway. I couldn't just leave them there in this storm. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. I looked at Maya. She was staring at the floor, her dark hair plastered to her face. She looked exhausted. Yes, but there was something else in her posture. A stillness. An unnerving lack of desperation for someone supposedly stranded. Her eyes, when they briefly flickered up to meet mine, weren't just tired. They were sharp, observant, cold. Of course not, I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Let's get you both something warm. My voice was calm, but my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Julian was a generous man. He donated millions to charity, but he wasn't a bring strangers home kind of man. He was private, meticulous, almost paranoid about security. This was not him. This was wrong. This wasn't charity. It was damage control, and it had everything to do with my husband's secret. He ushered them towards the guest wing, his hand hovering near Maya's back in a gesture that was meant to be helpful but looked possessive. The guest suite has its own entrance and kitchenette. You'll have everything you need. You can stay as long as it takes to get back on your feet, he said, his words directed at her but meant for me to overhear. He was setting boundaries, creating a story in our own home. He closed the door to the guest wing, leaving me standing alone in the vast, silent living room. The smell of the now forgotten dinner felt cloying. The warmth of the fireplace suddenly felt like a lie. He hadn't just brought two strangers into our home. He had brought in a reckoning, a living, breathing piece of my husband's secret life. And I knew, standing there in the cold silence of my own perfect kitchen, that a storm had just broken, and it had nothing to do with the weather outside. This one was here to destroy everything I held dear. The first few days were a masterclass in polite fiction. On the surface, everything was normal. Julian would leave for the office in his crisp suit, kissing me goodbye as if nothing had changed. I would go about my day yoga, calls with the interior design firm handling our new Aspen property, planning a charity gala. But underneath it all, a toxic current of tension was pulling our home apart. Maya was a ghost in the guest wing. She was silent, almost invisible. I'd leave fresh towels and groceries by her door, and they would disappear without a word. Once or twice I saw her in the garden, rocking the baby, Leo, her face a blank mask. I tried to talk to Julian about it, to understand. How long will they be staying? I asked one night, trying to keep my voice casual as he loosened his tie. He sighed, a deep, annoyed sound. Clara, please. The woman has nothing. Let's not put a deadline on compassion. Okay. He made me feel small, petty, like I was the villain for wanting answers in my own home. He had this way of twisting my concerns into character flaws. My questions became accusations. My intuition became paranoia. It was a subtle form of gaslighting I was only just beginning to recognize. He was building a wall around the topic of Maya, and every brick was one of my own insecurities. I started to doubt myself, to wonder if I really was just being jealous and territorial. After all, what kind of person resents a homeless woman and her child? But then, I saw the money. It was a Friday afternoon. Julian had come home early, which was rare. I was heading to the garage when I heard their voices coming from the guest wing. The door was slightly ajar. I stopped, my hand frozen on the handle to my own car. I know I shouldn't have listened, but I couldn't help it. This should be enough for now, Julian was saying, his voice a low, urgent whisper. Just keep a low profile. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone, especially Clara. Do you understand me? I understand. Maya's voice replied, flat and devoid of emotion. I peeked through the crack. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I saw Julian press a thick, white envelope into her hand. It wasn't a few $100s for groceries. It was a brick of cash, the kind you see in movies, the kind that buys silence. Maya took it without a word, her expression unchanged, and slipped it into her diaper bag. That night, the dam of my restraint finally broke. I waited until we were in our bedroom. The heavy door closed, creating an illusion of privacy in a house that no longer felt private at all. I saw you give her money today. Julian, I said, my voice shaking slightly. A lot of it. You told me she was a stranger. Why are you giving a stranger thousands of dollars in cash? He turned on me, his eyes suddenly cold. Are you spying on them now? Clara, is that what this is? My God, I'm trying to do a decent thing. And you're counting the cash she needed it for baby supplies, medical bills, things she's too proud to ask for. Medical bills. I pressed, my voice getting stronger. What's wrong with the baby? Nothing, it's just checkups, whatever. He snapped, throwing his hands up in exasperation. You know, I'm trying to run $1 billion company, and I come home to this, an interrogation. Just drop it. I'm handling it. He shut me down. Completely. He slept with his back to me that night, creating a chasm in our king-sized bed that felt 1,000,000 miles wide. And as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I knew this had gone far beyond simple charity. This was a transaction, a dangerous one. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that shattered my entire world, came 2 days later. It was a Sunday, and Julian was locked in his home office on a conference call. The house was quiet. I found myself wandering towards the guest wing, drawn by an impulse I couldn't explain. The door to Maya's suite was open, and I could hear the soft gurgle of the baby inside. Maya was in the small bathroom, running the shower. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding. Leo was lying in a portable bassinet in the middle of the room, awake and content. He was a beautiful baby, with a tuft of dark hair and big, curious eyes. As I watched, he kicked his little legs, and the light blanket slipped off his shoulder. And that's when I saw it. It was small, delicate, and perfectly formed. A birthmark, just below his left shoulder blade. It was the shape of a tiny, 5-pointed star. The air left my lungs. The room started to spin. My mind flashed back, years ago, to a sun-drenched beach in the Maldives. Julian and I were laughing, covered in sand and sunscreen. I remember tracing that exact same mark on his shoulder with my finger. A perfect little star. He'd told me his mother used to call it his lucky star. It was so unique, so specific. I'd never seen anything like it. Until now, I stood there, frozen, staring at the mark on this baby's skin. The baby of a supposedly homeless stranger my husband had brought into our home. The timeline, the secrecy, the cash, the lies, it all crashed together in my mind, forming a single, horrifying, undeniable conclusion. This wasn't just some random woman, and this wasn't just any baby. My entire marriage, my entire life, was a carefully constructed lie, and the proof was sleeping peacefully, right in front of me. I backed away from the doorway, my hand pressed against my mouth to stifle a gasp. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the entire house had tilted on its axis. I stumbled back to the kitchen, gripping the cold marble island to steady myself. The star, that perfect, 5-pointed star. It wasn't a coincidence. In a world of 7 billion people, a birthmark that specific, on the son of the woman my husband secretly brought into our home, was not a coincidence. It was a confession. My first thought was an affair. A sordid, simple, secret family. It was a horrifying thought, but it was a familiar kind of horrifying, a story as old as time. But as I stood there, my mind replaying the last few days, the tension in Julian's jaw, the brick of cash, the cold, calculating look in Maya's eyes, I knew this wasn't about an affair. It was deeper, darker. Her eyes held no love for him. They held nothing. That was the terrifying part. An absolute, chilling void. For the rest of the day, I was an actress. I smiled. I made small talk. I played the part of the gracious host, the loving wife, but inside, I was a detective, a profiler, watching every interaction interaction. I saw how Maya never looked Julian in the eye for more than a second. I saw how Julian flinched every time the baby cried. This wasn't a secret family. This was a hostage situation, and I couldn't tell who was the hostage and who was the captor. My chance came the next morning. Maya had taken Leo for a walk in the garden, and in her haste, she'd left her worn, battered diaper bag on a kitchen stool. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew it was a violation of privacy, but privacy had already been violated the moment she crossed my threshold. My hands trembled as I opened the main flap. Bottles, diapers, a cheap rattle. Then, I felt it. A small, hard object tucked into an inner side pocket. It was a wallet. A man's wallet. Old and cracked. I opened it. There was no ID, no credit cards, just a single, faded photograph, folded in half. I carefully unfolded it. It was a picture of a much younger Maya, smiling, her arm thrown around a young man with a brilliant, hopeful grin. He looked kind, and behind them, hand-painted on the wall of a garage, was a logo, a stylized N with a circuit board pattern. Nexus Innovations. Nexus Innovations. The name hit me like a physical blow. It was the name of Julian's first startup, the one he'd co-founded right out of Stanford, the one that had launched his career into the stratosphere. He always told the story of how he'd built it from the ground up, alone, after his first partner had dropped out. I tucked the photo into my pocket and walked, on autopilot, to a place I hadn't set foot in for years, my old home office. It was a sun-filled room I'd designed for my architecture practice, now just a storage space for my past life. I dusted off my old high-powered workstation, the screen flickering to life like a dormant beast. This was my space, my territory. And here, I was going to find the truth. I scanned the photograph, the resolution crisp and clear on my 4K monitor. I ran a facial recognition search on the young man. The results were almost instantaneous. His name was David Rossi. My blood ran cold. I opened a new tab and typed the name into a search engine, along with Nexus Innovations. The first hits were old tech articles praising the visionary duo of Julian Croft and David Rossi. They were partners, co-founders, best friends. Then I added another word to the search, death. The screen filled with headlines from 8 years ago. Silicon Valley mourns rising star David Rossi, 26 killed in tragic accident. I clicked on the first article. My breath caught in my throat. It was a single car crash on a winding stretch of Highway 1. Brake failure. The car went over a cliff. No witnesses. The police ruled it an accident. A horrible, tragic, freak accident that happened just 3 weeks before Nexus was set to launch their revolutionary software. The software that Julian, as the sole surviving founder, took to market. The software that made him a billionaire. The software that paid for this house, this life, this lie. I kept digging, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I found David's obituary. It listed his surviving family, a mother, a father, and a younger sister, Maya Rossi. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the horror on my face. It all clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting, the partner who dropped out, the freak accident, the arrival of Maya, the secret payments, the baby with his father's birthmark, no, not his father's, his uncle's. Leo wasn't Julian's son. He was David's, a legacy Julian had tried to bury. He wasn't a cheater. He was a monster. He hadn't just built a company. He'd built it on his best friend's grave. He had stolen David's work, stolen his legacy, and now, for some reason, he was trying to buy the silence of the last person on earth who could expose him. I looked around at the glass walls of my beautiful, sun-drenched office, and for the first time, I realized my perfect home wasn't a sanctuary. It was a mausoleum, bought and paid for with the blood of a dead man, and the ghost had just come home to haunt us. For hours, I just sat there in the dark, the words on the screen burning into my memory. Tragic accident, brake failure, no witnesses. It was the perfect crime, hidden in plain sight, sanitized by a police report and the passage of time. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest for a marriage that had never really existed, for a man I had never really known. But as the sun began to cast a gray light into my office, a new feeling began to rise through the sorrow. It was hot and sharp and clean. It was rage. I knew I couldn't confront Julian. Not yet. He was a master manipulator, a puppeteer who had controlled my life for a decade. He would lie. He would gaslight. He would twist my words until I was the crazy one. He would crush me with his army of lawyers before I could even land a blow. No, my only move, my only chance at finding the truth, was through the other woman living under my roof, the ghost he'd brought home. I waited until the next morning, after Julian had left for the office, his kiss on my cheek feeling like the touch of a snake. My hands were perfectly steady as I brewed a pot of coffee. The fear that had been my constant companion for days was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I poured 2 mugs, placed them on a tray, and walked to the guest wing. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. It was beating with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a drum beating for war. I didn't knock. I just opened the door and walked in. Maya was sitting on the edge of the bed, rocking Leo gently. She looked up, her body instantly tensing. That familiar, guarded mask was firmly in place. I walked over and set the tray down on the small table between us. I didn't sit. I stood over her, a position of power I didn't even know I was capable of taking. "We need to talk," I said. My voice was calm. Even. She just stared at me, her eyes unreadable. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the faded photograph of her and David. I placed it on the table next to the coffee mugs. "I know who you are. Maya Rossi," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I know who your brother was." For the first time, I saw a crack in her composure, a flicker of shock, of fear, but it was gone in an instant. She remained silent, her jaw tight. I pressed on, laying my cards on the table. Nexus Innovations. A car crash on Highway 1 just before the launch. $1 billion software. It's a tragic story, but I don't think it was an accident, and neither do you. Her eyes darted from the photo to my face. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I decided to take a different approach, to connect with the one thing we now had in common, our shared victimhood. "He took your brother," I said, my voice softening, the rage giving way to a shared, aching pain. "And in doing so, he took my life, too. This house, my marriage, everything I thought was real. It's all built on your family's tragedy." That's what broke her. A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. She finally looked at me, really looked at me, and the mask crumbled. I saw 8 years of grief, of anger, of a soul-crushing quest for justice. "He killed him," she whispered, her voice raw with a pain that was still fresh. "I know he did. David called me the night before. He was excited, but he was also scared. He said Julian was trying to push him out, to change the terms of their agreement. David wouldn't budge. He said, 'The code is as much mine as it is his.' And then the next day, he was gone." She told me everything. How Julian had shown up at her parents' house after the funeral, playing the part of the grieving best friend. How he'd given them a check for $100,000, a gift from David's share of the company. He'd said it was blood money, hush money, and it destroyed them. Her father had a heart attack 6 months later. Her mother faded away from a broken heart not long after. Maya was left all alone, with nothing but the burning certainty that her brother had been murdered. "Leo isn't Julian's son," she said, looking down at the sleeping baby. "He's David's. I was his surrogate. He wanted a child more than anything. The baby was born 6 months after he died. Julian didn't even know about him until I came here." "So you came here for revenge," I stated. It wasn't a question. "I came for justice," she corrected me, her eyes flashing with fire. "I have spent years trying to find proof, something the police couldn't ignore. I came here to get close to him, to find that one piece of evidence that would burn him to the ground." I listened, and as she spoke, the last remnants of my old life burned away. The woman I had feared was not my enemy. She was my reflection. We were 2 different women from 2 different worlds, both betrayed and broken by the same man. Julian thought of us as weak, a disposable wife and a grieving girl he could buy off. He had no idea what he had created. I finally sat down opposite her. I looked at the picture of her smiling brother, then at her tear-streaked face, then at the innocent child sleeping nearby. My path forward was crystal clear. "You want justice," I said, my voice now laced with steel. "I want to take back the life he stole from me. Maybe they're the same thing." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "He thinks he's untouchable. He thinks we are 2 women he can control with money and fear. He has no idea what we can do together." A new light flickered in Maya's eyes. Not hope, not yet, but understanding. The beginning of a trust forged in the fires of a shared betrayal. "What are you proposing?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I picked up my coffee mug, the warmth spreading through my cold hands. "I'm proposing an alliance," I said. "You have the motive. I have the access. You know the crime. I know the man. Together, we're going to give your brother the justice he deserves." The 3 weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and whispered conversations. My old architect's office became our war room. Maya, who had been a ghost in my house, was now my shadow, my partner, fueled by coffee and a burning need for justice. We worked. She would provide the memories, the names, the dates, the human pieces of the puzzle. I would take her grief and forge it into evidence. I resurrected my old research skills, diving into digital archives, financial records, and corporate filings. I hired a private investigator, a discreet ex-cop who specialized in cold cases, and paid him from my own trust fund the one part of my life Julian couldn't touch. We were 2 women, a world apart, united by the same man's treachery. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. The day the PI's report landed in my inbox, I knew it was time. The report was concise, brutal, and conclusive. The brake lines on David's car had been professionally, deliberately severed. It was not an accident. It was an execution. That afternoon, I put on a navy blue dress, the one Julian had bought me for our last anniversary. It felt like armor. I picked up the phone and called the secretary of the board of directors for Julian's company. "This is Clara Croft," I said, my voice as cool and steady as ice. "Citing Article 3, Section 2 of the corporate bylaws, I am exercising my right as a majority stakeholder to call an emergency board session. The agenda is a time-sensitive security risk of the highest order. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. sharp." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. The CEO's wife, the quiet, smiling woman who organized charity galas, had never interfered with the business until now. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a mocking contrast to the storm I was about to unleash. I walked into the boardroom on the 50th floor, a glass cage overlooking all of Silicon Valley. The 12 board members, all men, all allies of Julian, were already seated around the long, obsidian table. They looked annoyed, impatient. Julian was the last to arrive. He strode in, radiating power and arrogance, and gave me a condescending smile. He leaned in and patted my arm. "Clara, honey, this is a bit dramatic. Don't you think whatever this is, I'm sure we could have handled it at home?" "No, Julian," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "I think this is the only place it could be handled." I walked to the head of the table and plugged my laptop into the projector. The screen flickered to life. But the first slide wasn't a corporate logo or a data chart. It was the faded photograph of a smiling David and Maya Rossi. A confused murmur went through the room. Julian's smile tightened at the edges. "Good morning, gentlemen," I began, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. "You were told this meeting was about a security risk, and it is. It's about a fatal flaw that has been embedded in the core of this company since its inception." I clicked to the next slide. It was the original partnership agreement for Nexus Innovations, signed by Julian Croft and David Rossi, this company's success. I continued, my voice gaining strength, "is built on its proprietary source code, the engine that drives everything we sell, a code that was written by two men. One of them is in this room. The other—" I clicked again, and a picture of David's kind, smiling face filled the screen, "is dead." Julian started to speak, a dismissive laugh in his throat. "Clara, what on earth are you doing? This is ancient history. Is it—" I shot back, turning to face him. "Is it ancient history that you pushed your partner to sign away his equity just before launch? Is it ancient history that you funneled company funds into a private account just days before he died?" On the screen, I flashed copies of emails I had recovered from an old server, bank statements. Julian's face went from annoyed to pale. The board members were sitting bolt upright now, their eyes glued to the screen. "David Rossi refused to be pushed out of his own company," I said, my voice rising. "He was a good man who believed in a fair deal, and for that, he was given a death sentence." I clicked to the final, damning slide. It was the summary from the private investigator's report, with 3 words highlighted in red: break, lines, severed. The room erupted. Shouts of disbelief, of anger. Julian was on his feet, his face a mask of purple rage. "This is insane. She's hysterical. This is a lie. My wife is having a breakdown." "Am I said calmly. "I'm not the one who brought my victim's sister into my home. hoping to buy her silence. I'm not the one who has been paying her off for months to keep her quiet about the truth. I looked toward the back of the room. And I'm not the one whose crimes are about to be laid bare for the entire world to see. As if on cue, the double doors of the boardroom swung open. It wasn't a secretary. It was 2 uniformed police officers and a detective in a trench coat, his expression grim. They moved with a quiet purpose that silenced the room instantly. The detective walked past me and stopped in front of my husband. "Julian Croft," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're under arrest for the murder of David Rossi." Chaos. Absolute chaos. Julian was screaming, protesting his innocence, calling my name, a mixture of fury and pathetic pleading in his voice. But I didn't even look at him. I just watched as the officers cuffed his hands behind his back, the same hands that had held mine at the altar, the same hands that had signed a man's death warrant. As they led him away, a broken, sputtering mess. His eyes finally met mine across the room. He was searching for something: pity, love, regret. He found nothing. I felt nothing. The love was gone, burned away by his lies. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, hard sense of finality. It was over. The takedown was complete. You expect the explosion to be the loudest part, but it's not. The real chaos begins in the silence that follows. After the police led Julian away, a stunned, deafening silence fell over the boardroom. 12 of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley just stared at the empty doorway, then at me, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. The silence lasted for maybe 10 seconds. Then the dam broke. It was pure pandemonium. Men yelling into their phones, screaming at their assistants. One of them, a silver-haired man named Arthur who had known Julian for 20 years, just kept muttering, "My God, we're ruined. We're all ruined." They were like rats on a sinking ship, scrambling to save themselves. Their first instinct wasn't justice or morality, it was the stock price. I let the chaos swirl around me for a moment, and I felt nothing. Just a profound, empty calm. I walked back to the head of the table, my heels clicking on the floor. "Gentlemen," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a knife. They all stopped and looked at me. Panicking is the worst thing we can do right now. The story is already out. Every second we waste is another point off our stock value. Arthur stared at me, his eyes wide. "What are you suggesting?" "Clara, we just watched your husband get arrested for murder." "I am suggesting," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching, "that you remember I am the majority stakeholder in this company. Julian's shares are now my shares. And as the person in charge, I'm telling you our first call is to the crisis PR firm on retainer. Our second is to our corporate counsel. We will draft a statement. We will announce an interim CEO. And we will show the world that this company is more than one man. Now, who's going to make the call?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of something new in their eyes. Not pity, not contempt. A grudging respect. I wasn't the CEO's wife anymore. I was the one in charge. Leaving the building was like walking through a hurricane of flashing lights. The news had spread like a virus. The lobby was a zoo, a writhing mass of reporters and cameras. They screamed my name, shoving microphones in my face. "Clara, did you know? Are the allegations true? What does this mean for the company?" I just kept walking. I focused on the glass doors at the far end of the lobby, my face a mask of stone. I let their questions wash over me, Every flash of a camera felt like a small explosion, but I didn't let them see me break. I had shown the board my strength. I would not show the world my weakness. The drive home was silent. My phone was buzzing itself into oblivion on the passenger seat, but I ignored it. When I finally walked through my front door, the house was quiet. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It looked so peaceful, so normal. A complete lie. I found Maya in the living room. She was sitting on the sofa, holding a sleeping Leo, her eyes glued to the TV. On the screen was Julian's face, a mugshot, with a breaking news banner underneath, Tech Titan Julian Croft arrested in decades-old murder case. She looked up at me as I entered, her eyes wide with a terrifying mix of relief and fear. We were two soldiers who had just survived a battle, standing in the wreckage, unsure of what came next. I walked over to the TV and turned it off. The sudden silence was a relief. "We're not going to watch that," I said softly. "It's over." She just nodded, clutching Leo a little tighter. "What happens now?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Now," I said, sitting down in the armchair across from her. "The work begins. I've secured a safe house for you and Leo, a place no one can find you. The press, Julian's people, they'll be looking for you. You need to be a ghost." For the first time, I saw the true weight of her grief. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about the terrifying reality of a future she'd never planned for. I had my anger to keep me warm. She only had her brother's memory. Later that night, long after Maya and Leo were gone, I stood alone in my office. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of infinite possibilities. I had done it. I had exposed a murderer. I had avenged David Rossi. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an amputation. To save myself, I had to cut off a part of my life, a part of my own heart. The woman who had woken up that morning, Mrs. Clara Croft, wife of a billionaire, was gone. In her place was a stranger I was just beginning to know. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. They were the hands of a woman who had just destroyed a man, a company, and a life. My life. The battle was over. But as I looked out at the endless city, I knew the war. The war for who I was going to become was just beginning. The trial was a 6-month circus. Julian, ever the master performer, played the part of the grieving, betrayed husband, his high-priced lawyers painting me as a scorned, hysterical woman who had conspired with a manipulative opportunist. They tried to assassinate my character on the stand, twisting my love into obsession and my quest for justice into a greedy corporate takeover. For 6 months, I sat in that courtroom and listened to the man I once loved try to destroy me. But I never wavered, because unlike him, I had the one thing his money couldn't buy: the truth. And in the end, the truth won. I'll never forget the moment the jury foreman read the verdict. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at me and Maya, who was sitting beside me, her hand gripping mine. "Guilty," he said, the word cutting through the courtroom's silence, "on all charges." It wasn't a moment of triumphant joy. It was a moment of profound, heavy, gut-wrenching relief. It was the sound of a ghost finally being laid to rest. Julian was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. He was a ghost now, too, doomed to haunt a prison cell for the rest of his days. While the legal system was dealing with Julian, Maya and I were fighting a different war, the war to save the company. We were hemorrhaging money and talent. The board was in chaos, and the press was circling like vultures. For months, we lived in that boardroom, surviving on coffee and sheer, bloody-minded determination. We fought with investors. We renegotiated contracts. We spent countless hours reassuring the brilliant engineers, the ones who had been loyal to David's original vision, that the era of lies was over. And slowly, painfully, we pulled the company back from the brink. We didn't just save it. We transformed it. We sold the soulless glass tower Julian had built and moved into a new, collaborative workspace. We tore down the old corporate structure, and with it, the toxic culture Julian had fostered. And we gave the company a new name. We called it Solstice Innovations, to mark the turning point, the beginning of a new day. I never went back to architecture. I discovered a part of myself I never knew existed in those chaotic months: a leader, a strategist, a businesswoman who could be just as ruthless as Julian. But with one crucial difference: I had a conscience. Maya, in turn, found her own calling. She now heads the research and development department, honoring her brother's legacy by ensuring that every piece of code we create is built on a foundation of ethics and integrity. It's been 2 years now. Our new office is bright and open, filled with the buzz of creativity and the sound of laughter. Sometimes, Maya brings Leo in. He's a toddler now, with his father's brilliant smile and a laugh that can light up a room. He'll play with his toy blocks on the floor of my office, while Maya and I sketch out the future on a whiteboard. We're not just colleagues. We're not just friends. We're family, forged in the fires of betrayal and rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect and trust. Sometimes I look out the window at the sprawling valley below, and I think about the woman I used to be, the woman who lived in a glass house, convinced she was living a perfect life. I had to watch that life burn to the ground to realize it was never really mine. It was a beautiful, gilded cage. Now, I have something else, something real, something I built not with steel and glass, but with truth and resilience. It's not the life I ever would have planned, but it's a life that is, for the first time, truly my own. The narrator's tone shifts, becoming more direct and warm, as if speaking directly to the viewer. That's my story. It began in the wreckage of a lie, but it ended with a truth I never expected to find: that the strongest, bravest, most authentic version of yourself is often waiting for you on the other side of your greatest heartbreak. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the unwavering power of the truth and the incredible resilience of the human spirit, please take a moment to hit that like button. It's a small click, but it tells the world that these stories of survival and empowerment matter. And I truly want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment in your life that forced you to discover a strength you never knew you had? Share your experience in the comments below. This isn't just a channel, it's a community, and we read every single one of your stories. Finally, if you want to be a part of that community and never miss a story about justice, overcoming the odds, and finding your power, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell, because your story matters, our stories matter, and we are just getting started. Thank you for listening.